Welcome back, everybody. I've got my new playmat here. Hopefully that'll help the camera focus. It has trouble with the plain black background, but hopefully that'll help out. And today we're going to have a little bit more advanced topic than usual. We're going to go into color errors, ink errors, and the difference between those and sun-faded cards. So this is basically going to be a misprint authentication video. And one of the first things that we need to go over on that topic is how the cards are made to start with. So we'll cover some bases on how the cards are printed inside the print facility. Magic cards are printed using an offset printing press with a halftone CMYK method. This means that Magic cards only use 4 colors of ink. These colors are cyan, magenta, yellow, and key. That's what the K stands for. For most things, including Magic cards, the key color is black. So when you see the letter K, that's black. All the colors on the card are created by using differing amounts of these 4 colors on the blank white cardstock. Any white that you see is unprinted area of the cardstock. Each of these 4 colors is printed separately, one after the other. They each have their own printing plate, and they each have their own print unit on the printing press. Each of these 4 colors is printed as a grid of dots. The dots are equally spaced as a grid, and they can be different sizes to make the area more or less dense with the color. For example, a darker blue will have larger cyan dots, while a lighter blue will have smaller cyan dots with more unprinted white space showing around them. On this example, notice how all the cyan dots align into a grid, regardless of whether they're big dots or little dots. The dots could be so big that they touch each other, making that area solid cyan. To make the color darker from there, you'd have to add black dots. With each color being printed on top of the previous colors, something needs to be done to prevent the top color from obscuring all the previous colors. 2 things are done. First, the printing ink is not opaque. This allows colors below to show through a little bit. A yellow dot printed on top of a cyan dot will look like a green dot and not like a yellow dot. If you take a close look at this red mana symbol, you can see that this grid of magenta dots continues underneath the black mana symbol. You can see each dot. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. It aligns with the grid. That's because even the black ink is not fully opaque. The second thing is that the angle of each color grid is rotated to keep the dots from overlapping as much. For example, one grid could be at 0 degrees so that its rows of dots were horizontal, while the next grid can be rotated to 45 degrees so that its rows of dots ran in a 45-degree straight line. Humans are very good at pattern recognition. Patterns can distract us from the image we're supposed to be seeing. This is called moire. The angle of each color layer grid relative to each other color layer grid is what creates the moire pattern. Any way that you overlap the 4 grids of dots will create the moire pattern. Let me see if I can show you one here. I'm not sure if this will show up on the video, but I can see it on my computer screen. In this instance, the 2 grids are the black dots on this card back and the pixels of the screen, which are horizontal and vertical. If you can see it, it looks kind of like we have lines going this direction. And here's one, and there's also lines going this direction. It's almost like you can see a grid. If I zoom in, it changes. Now it looks like the lines are going this way. Not straight up and down, but just sort of tilted a little bit. And this way. Some moire patterns are more distracting or eye-catching than other patterns. There are many different moire patterns, and some of them have names. The rosette moire pattern is one of the least distracting moire patterns, so it is very commonly used, including being used on magic cards. Some people mistakenly think that the rosette is proprietary to Wizards of the Coast. That's not true at all. It's used in printing press printing all over the place. Here's an example of some of the angles which are commonly used in offset printing. The rosette pattern is created by overlapping each color layer grid at a different angle. To be more precise, each grid must be rotated a specific amount relative to the other grids in order to create the rosette pattern. The point here is that a full rosette is only visible on a portion of the card which has all 4 colors. If you only have 3 colors, you'll have a partial rosette. If you only have 2 colors, it will be a half rosette. And if you only have 1 color, it will simply be a grid of dots. There's no rosette at all. The rosette pattern is a repeating circular pattern like this, or like this. These are all rosettes. Instead of being a sort of a quilted grid or like a flannel shape, it's circles. You could think of it as like a flower, and all the bumps are petals. It's like a bumpy circle. How many colors are used in each part of the card just depends on the image being printed. Have a close look at this revised Sol Ring. The yellow area appears as a grid of yellow dots. They're horizontal here. The mostly red area has the red dots running at a different angle, with some yellow dots thrown in. The colorless casting cost circle shows 3 colors of dots. They're small dots, but you can see the rosette pattern. The brown card border uses large dots of all 4 colors, and the rosette pattern is very clear. The angles used for each color layer are chosen when the design team sends their finished work to be color separated and half-toned in preparation for printing. Prior to being half-toned, the files Wizards of the Coast uses are in continuous tone. Not every set uses the same angles. That's very important. If you're comparing these angles, make sure that you're comparing cards from the same set, unless your intention is to compare the angles of different sets. Some sets use the same angles for each color as other sets. Some sets use the same angles but for different colors. Some sets use some of the same angles and different angles for the other colors. Some sets use 3 angles the same with only 1 angle being different. Don't assume anything. Look and verify if you're going to be working with this in the future. It's really important to have a card from the same set if you're going to be making this kind of a comparison. Preferably a card of the same color. Quick note about Alternate 4th edition. Alternate 4th does not have half-tone dots. Instead, it was printed with a stochastic method, which does not have a rosette pattern. So you can see the example here on the screen. Regular 4th, you can see the rosettes, and alternate 4th does not have them. So this halftone pattern, this is called amplitude modulation, where the size of the dots change, but the spacing between the dots does not change. And this is called frequency modulation. This is where the space between the dots change, but the dots are all the same size. If you needed more of a color, you'd just have more dots. Alternate 4th is printed this way on both the front and the back of the card. I think some of the newer invention cards are printed this way on only the front, but only from one of the print facilities that makes them. I think it's the Japanese facility. Haven't quite narrowed that down yet. But if you see this on a new invention, that's what's going on. That's the basics of how the cards have color and how that color is applied to the cards. Now we're going to start going over some things that can go wrong. Okay, these are some color errors. When a card is missing all of the colors except for black, that's called an albino. The card is only black and white, no other colors. We'll switch back to this close-up view here. We can zoom in. You can see here that the dots are at an angle and there's no rosette pattern. The exact way the colors are applied could change a little from set to set, but typically it's black first, then cyan, then magenta, then yellow, and then more black for the text, followed by a clear wear coat to seal everything. These earlier sets had a single black strike instead of having a separate black layer for text and for art. The way that albino cards are typically created is when the press has to be stopped to clean some debris or fix a problem with some other part of the print run. So when the press stops, there's some cards in each color unit of the press. These cards, for example, would have gone through the black color unit, but the press was stopped before they moved on to the other colors. Now, quality control is supposed to clean the press to fix the problem and pick up all these kind of things and throw them away, but they don't always catch everything. Sometimes a few things get through. Here's a list of the sets which are known to have albino cards. You'll notice that they're all commons. Not really sure why that is, but my best guess is that it's just because commons are such a large part of the print run. They print far more commons than anything else. So if a mistake's going to happen somewhere, it's more likely to happen on the commons part of the print run than in one of the smaller portions of the print run. Honorable mention here for the Jumpstart albino cards, which aren't quite truly albino. They do have some of the other colors showing in small bits here and there, but they look a lot like albinos. Albino cards are rare and pretty expensive. Next, we're going to talk about cards that only have cyan and black. Over the past few years, these have gained the nickname Bluebino because of their blue color. These seem to be even more rare than the albino cards, and I suspect this is because they're closer to whatever problem caused the press to be shut down, and thus they're more likely to be pulled by quality control and thrown away. Let's check one out under the microscope. Sorry if the pixels are jumping around a little bit. Let me see if I can just get a little closer there. All right, you can see that it's only cyan and black. Where the dots are larger, you can kind of see some half rosette looking things, but they're not really full rosettes. These are the sets known to have Bluebino cards. Again, they're all commons, and these sets are also all on the other list. One of the things that these cards have in common, the Bluebinos and the Albinos, is that they don't have a clear wear coat. They seem to have a very matte finish. I don't know if I can get that on the camera here, but you can see the glare on this card, the way the light reflects off of it, and it just doesn't do that on the albino card. It's more obvious in person. Here's one of the Jumpstart Albino cards. This is a red card, you can see by the casting cost here, but it looks, well, really white and black, right? There is just a little bit of red down here at the bottom. And there's some flecks of red on this edge over here. Let's stick it under the microscope. You can see a little bit of cyan there. So this card definitely has some cyan towards the top of the art box there. And there's some in the 4 there. Moving down to the bottom, let's find the red area. It's fascinating how red that is, because red requires both magenta and yellow. You can see all the colors of dots there in the picture, but they're pretty small dots. Yeah, so that's Jumpstart Albino card. That's what those look like. They're not really true albinos. These other cards, solid black, that's it. Black and unprinted cardstock. But this has some other colors going on. And it still has the clear wear coat. It has, see, it reflects light. Okay, let's move on to some other color errors. Here's a card with lightly printed cyan. The purple swirls around the edges are much more magenta looking. Pop that under the microscope. So here's the regular one. And here is the light one. Probably can't get a side-by-side of that. This is another lightly printed cyan card. When you take the blue out of the green, then the green appears to be more yellowish colored. And when you take the blue out of the purple, then the purple gets more magenta colored. Here's a card with lightly applied black. here's a card that's missing the magenta. Let's stick that one under the microscope. Looks like there is just a little bit of magenta there. But it's not on most of the card. There's a couple dots. There's a little more. Compared to the normal card, it's very obviously red. Here's another interesting color error. Along the right side of this card, it's missing the cyan, but just along that one side. So there's an area there that's only magenta and white. And black, I guess. Oh, and yellow. On the left side, you can see how On the left side, you can see how the yellow and the magenta combine to make the reds and oranges. The pink on the right is what plain magenta looks like. There's some yellow by itself. Interestingly, it looks like the yellow is not at 0 degrees on this set. Here's another color error. This one's pretty common. This card is missing the black only on a portion of the card. So this is a card that's new enough to have the text layer of black separate from the art layer of black. And so this card is missing the numbers up here and the mana symbol, and it's also missing the power and toughness, and the expansion symbol here is mostly gone. Here's another type of color error. Now this one isn't caused by the press being stopped or anything drastic like that. This is a liquid, probably fountain solution, getting onto the cardstock. Basically, it causes the subsequent colors to not stick to the cardstock, so the ink won't adhere. Anything printed before it got wet is there just fine, And if anything were printed after the liquid dried, that would be fine also. Interesting thing about the card on the right here is that it's a foil card. And so the ink that was printed before it got wet there is the white underprinting layer. That's an opaque white that's supposed to mask the foil so that those areas of the card are not foiled. Now something you'll notice here is that when this happens, when the water gets on the cardstock, the shapes are usually oval shaped in a horizontal direction. That's because when the sheet goes through the rollers, it spreads the liquid in that direction. I want to stick these under the microscope real quick. I think I'll zoom out a bit here. Okay, you can see that the line between the normal colored ink portion of the card and the black and white portion of the card is a pretty hard line. And here's the other card. Again, it's a pretty hard line between the affected area and the not affected area. There you can get a look at that white underprinting a little bit. All right, one more there. That's a fun color error. So this was an obstruction on the press. This had maybe like a piece of a sheet or something that was over it, and then it slid around and it moved whenever the sheet went through the press. So you had this piece of debris sort of moving around as it went through each of the subsequent colors. And as a result, different parts of this card are masked off as the debris moved to cover the area. So let's stick that one under the microscope. That's a pretty cool card. And there's a crease right there. That's where the card was bent. So you can see the top right portion of this image doesn't have the color black. And as you move on this way, it loses magenta right there, and then it loses pretty much everything. Okay, those are all legitimate color errors. Now we're going to talk about sun fading, also known as sun bleaching. Cards left in the sunlight will fade. This is caused by UV rays. Each of the 4 colored inks used on magic cards has a different color fastness. Color fastness is the resistance to fading. Typically, colors fade in the same order that you see the colors in the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. This is also the same order that colors disappear the further you go down into the ocean. So if there's any scuba divers out there, you might know that already. That's just the way the light spectrum works. It has to do with the wavelength of the light for each color. As we discussed, Magic cards don't have inks in all the colors of the rainbow. So for us, the order that they fade is magenta, yellow, blue, and then black. Magenta disappears the fastest, and yellow along with it, while blue takes forever, if it disappears at all. Sun-faded cards will typically be blue and black colored. Some cards don't contain much blue to begin with, like red cards. As I mentioned, the ink printed onto the cards is covered by a clear wear coat. If this wear coat is oil-based, it will eventually yellow if subjected to enough heat or UV rays. Some people attribute this to age, but it's actually caused by heat and UV, so don't leave your cards in your car or in your attic. I know that the older cards will yellow, but the formula for the wear coat may have changed over the years, which could result in different amounts of yellowing depending on what wear coat formula was used for each set. It has a lot to do with the oil content in the wear coat. Also note that alternate 4th edition used a UV-resistant wear coat, so these cards don't fade in the sunlight, and this also causes them to not glow under a black light, which is a pretty easy way to identify them if you're going through a lot of bulk. Now let's look at some sun-faded cards. On this Atog, the yellows and reds have already started to fade away. You can see that this character here is more pink than normal. And all the colors seem just kind of washed out. Well, it looks faded. Even though the magenta starts to fade first, the yellow starts to fade before the magenta is all the way gone. So you don't have a situation where you can get rid of just one color. Unlike on the printing press, where if you have a color that's printed lightly, it's typically just one color. So if you're looking at a card and multiple colors appear to be lightly applied, especially if they're magenta and yellow, that card's very likely to be sun-faded and not a misprint. On the other hand, if you're looking at a card and only one color layer is affected, either entirely missing or lightly applied, and the other 3 color layers are perfectly fine, that's pretty likely to be a misprint, especially if the color that's missing isn't magenta. Cyan fades extremely slowly. You practically can't get rid of it. So most cards that are fully sun-faded appear to be cyan and black. They look a lot like a Bluebino. The differences between a sun-fade and a Bluebino can be subtle. One of the things you want to look for is surface damage from the sun, or for any amount of fading at all on the cyan. The black fades even slower than the cyan, so you're not likely to see fading on that. This is an example of a sun-faded card. Now this is a red card, so it doesn't have much blue to begin with. So you have to watch out for that on red cards, white cards, maybe black cards. They just don't have much blue. Green cards have lots of blue because green is made from yellow and blue, and obviously blue cards have a lot of blue. So one of the things you can look for on a sun-faded card is that the dots don't just disappear. They kind of fade to gray before they disappear. So you need to look over the card and check it out to see if you can find any dots that should be a different color. It may help to have a regular copy of the card to compare with. Right here, these dots, which are at a 45-degree angle, are supposed to be black. But you can see that these dots run at a different angle. They're not supposed to be black. Those are some of the colored dots that have faded to this sort of gray color. That's one of the clues that this card is actually sun-faded and not an albino. Another big clue that it's sun-faded and not albino is that it's not on the list of known sets to have albino cards. It's also not a common. Cards are printed on whole sheets, so you're not likely to get just a single card in a set that's an albino. You're going to have a sheet. And another thing you could look for when identifying sun fades is to check for that clear wear coat, because the real albinos and bluebinos don't seem to have it. They have a really matte looking finish, and this might work better if you have a real albino or bluebino to compare with side by side. Otherwise, you might not really have the experience required to do this test. But if you have one or you've handled them in person before, then you'll understand and you'll know what to look for. Another thing you could look for on sun fades is evidence of the colored dots underneath the black, like we showed here earlier. These are magenta dots, which are underneath this black part of this mana symbol. Now, because they're underneath the black ink, they wouldn't fade as well as the dots that are exposed. Sun fades aren't always done intentionally. Sometimes it happens just from laying in the display case for a long time at a game store if the card doesn't sell. Especially in Japan because of the type of lights that they use in their display cases. They tend to fade cards faster than in some other places. Here's another example of a card that's sun faded. Something was shielding this top part of the card from fading. Interesting thing about sun fading is that the sun moves across the sky in an arc. And so the angle of the light hitting the card changes throughout the day. And you get this situation where it's not really a hard line. It's like a blended area. It fades from all color to no color. And that's not something you'd expect to see on a factory misprint. Now you can get a fairly hard line on a sun fade if the item that's masking the card is pressed right up against the card. Here's another example. You can see that this card had another card laying on top of it in the case. Here's the corner of the card that was on top. There's the top of the card, and here's the side of the card. So this card had some other card laying on top of it in the case for a long time, and the sun coming in the window eventually faded this card. Now, it takes a long time for that to happen, but it does happen. Other common shapes that you might see on sun fades are a rectangle shape. It might be here in this corner. It could be anywhere on the card, but it's a rectangle shape, and what that's from is the price tag that's placed on the top loader that the card was in when it was sitting on the shelf in the game store. So the card goes in a top loader, and basically the price tag masks an area from the sun. So the rest of the card fades, maybe not all the way, maybe just sort of partially faded. And then you have a vibrant price tag shaped area somewhere, and that's your clue that, hey, this is a sun fade. Another one that we see a lot is somewhere down here along the bottom, usually this area or this area, depending on what year the Ultra Pro sleeve was made. You'll see a not faded circle area where the hologram was at on the Ultra Pro sleeve. So Ultra Pro sleeves, I don't know if they still have them, but they used to have a little authenticity hologram circle shape down there, and that would actually block the sun from fading that area, and the rest of the card could be faded. Sun fading isn't just about exposing the card to the sun. You also have to factor in temperature and humidity, because in certain environments the card will just curl right up. Also, whatever is protecting the card from the environment, whether that's a sleeve or a top loader or a window, maybe the display case itself, whatever that is between the sun and the card, that's going to protect the card in some small amount. So it will affect how the card fades, potentially reducing the effectiveness of the sunlight. Quite a while back, someone sent me these cards to check out. They wanted to know my opinion on whether the cards were sun faded or authentic misprints. And just looking at them, I'm really sure they're authentic. The surface sheen matches these over here. It's like the wear coat's not there. They're a very matte finish. It's uniform. They don't look sun damaged at all. We can pull them up. I have a high resolution scan here, so we can get a closer look. All right, so here's the Circle of Protection Black. Now this black would normally be a rich black, which is made of all colors, but you can only see black and cyan here. Pretty crisp. think that might be one cyan dot. Not cyan, sorry, one magenta dot. And it looks like there's another one right here. Now, if this were something that was sun faded, that dot would be gray or gone entirely by the point that all the rest of this was faded. So that's actually a good sign. There's a few more spots here of magenta that's not faded. Some in that area. Whoa. Nice spot of it there. See, now stuff like that would be faded if this were a sun fade. Instead, it's remnants of ink from passing through the rest of the press once the machine started up again. All right, let's switch to the next card. Again, crisp blue and black. This one's really clean. That's a nice card. All right, Giant Spider. Now this one does have some remnants of yellow here. And again, they're not faded. Just sort of splotchy there. Looks like there might even be like one or two red dots here. And there's some more yellow up here in the top border a bit. Again, that's good. That would have faded if this were a sun-faded card. You wouldn't be able to get all of the yellow gone in this area while leaving it here without, you know, some kind of masking going on, and that really doesn't look like an area that's been masked off. It's just too splotchy for that. Looks like there is just a few pink dots here too. Magenta. There's one. It's amazing how far out onto the white border this is. So, like, clearly something was going wrong there in order for that to happen. That would be a major registration error. I kind of wish it was printed that way, because that would be pretty impressive if the whole yellow layer was shifted over to here across the entire surface of the card. Yep, there was clearly some stuff going wrong with the printing press there. Sea Serpent. Another pretty clean looking card. I feel like there was some yellow right in the middle. Yeah, right there. A little bit more there. Okay, and there you have it. That is information about factory color errors, a variety of misprint types there, and sun-faded cards, and how to tell them apart, kind of. So I hope that helps. If you're worried about something like acetone removing the ink, that's not really an issue for this kind of a color error situation, because an acetone or any other kind of solvent removes all of the ink in that area and it smears it around the edges. So you can't just remove a single color with a solvent. So you're not going to be able to duplicate this look with a solvent in the same way that well, I don't have one here, but in the same way that a sun fade would resemble something like this. So yeah, solvent's not a concern. Same way with pencil eraser. You're just not going to be able to remove a single color with something like that. But yeah, sun fading does bleach stuff, but these aren't sun fades. I believe these are going to hit the market at some point. They don't belong to me. I have to return them to the owner. So if you want something like that, keep an eye out. And that's it for this video. Enjoy the rest of your day. hope you learned something. And yeah, have fun collecting.